With Seattle's Fifth Avenue Theater struggling, what is the state of live theater in 2026? And in other arts and culture news, if you're a homeowner, you might soon be paying $150 a year to support our public libraries. We'll be breaking down the latest library levy proposal. But first, after a 24-hour debate, the Washington House passed the Millionaires Tax 51-46. Here to discuss is Chase Hutchinson, critic and journalist. Welcome, Chase.
Thanks for having me.
And we have Margo Vansynghel, the arts economy reporter at the Seattle Times. Welcome, Margo.
Hi, nice to be here.
So this Millionaires Tax bill passed the House 51-46, with 8 Democrats joining the 38 Republicans in opposition. The final vote was cast 6:10 p.m. Tuesday, concluding an unbroken stretch of floor action that began at 5:30 p.m. the day before. At around 16 hours in, the House Clerk Bernard Dean told Axios that it was, quote, certainly the longest floor debate in recent history, and then they kept going. At hour 21, the Seattle Times talked to Representative Julia Reed, who said that with the lawmakers not breaking for showers, there is, quote, starting to be a definite funk out there. Margo, Chase, have you all been following this?
I have been. I didn't know that particularly visceral detail about the funk.
I also have.
Thank you. I didn't need to know. Yes.
What I saw was the detail that Melissa Santos of Axios had originally shared, which is that there was an amendment suggested that the tax be delayed until the NBA agrees to bring a Sonics team to Seattle.
Yes.
Which is very funny, but also I just imagine everyone groaning in the room like, please, no. That could be forever.
Yeah, they slogged through and mostly rejected 80 proposed amendments. And, Republicans were filibustering. Margo, had you been following this at all?
Yeah, I've been following it a little bit, and when I knew that we were gonna discuss it, I was like trying to look at all the amendments and kind of wondering if I needed to be ready for a quiz, and I was like, I can't do this. There's too many. It
is too many.
Yeah,
I mean, there's quite a bit of theatrics. It's like you got to keep yourself entertained for 24 hours on the floor. So one state rep, Jim Walsh, quoted Monty Python at one point, saying no one expects the Spanish Inquisition when talking about tax rejections. Earlier, a state representative named Brian Burnett recited part of the state's law against necrophilia, arguing that evading the income tax should not carry the same penalty as that crime, which is a Class C felony. So, after all of that, the House did vote to pass it. What do you all remember about the Millionaires Tax details, like how it's going to work?
It's not going to go into effect right away. That this isn't like we're waking up today and this is going into effect now. That we'll be looking at the impacts of this in like the years ahead. So I think kind of on both sides of it, this will be part of something that is Washington's future, but the present is still basically the same.
That's right. Yeah. Collections would not begin until 2029 on the previous year's income.
Right. And to add on to that, there could be kind of legal challenges, and there could be kind of a drawn out challenge to this. And so it could be much longer than even 2028, potentially. Right.
Yeah, I had seen that Republicans have been arguing that an income tax might not actually be allowed per a 1930s state Supreme Court ruling that said that income tax is only allowed if it's applied uniformly on all wage earners. But Democrats have said that ruling would likely be overturned if it was reconsidered today. But who knows? It seems like there could be some legal battle ahead.
I don't want to make light of the incident that had happened where someone was drinking on the floor in the House recently, but this is making me feel like I kind of understand now. This sounds like quite a process. We should have breathalyzed them when they were going on the 24 hours to see. Not actually, but maybe.
Yeah, I saw some reports that there were, for the Dem side at least, like a fully written out schedule of like who's on deck for like what hours. And like if you had the graveyard shift, seems like it was a rough night for you. So
But I would say as a last thing, props to the journalists that were like covering all of this. All jokes aside, it was a long shift but a valuable one. I think Jim Brunner and Shauna Salisbury at the Seattle Times, Melissa Santos, they were putting in the work, and I salute them.
100%. Kudos to the journalists who were actually in Olympia having to be in it with all of our legislature. Okay, so a refresher about what actually was part of the bill that passed. For folks who might not remember, this is a 9.9% tax on people earning over $1 million. So to be clear, this is not a tax on that $1 million. It's a tax on whatever they make above $1 million. So if you're making like $1.5 million, that $500,000 is what is taxed, not the one. That is expected to apply to 20 to 30,000 households in the state. It'll be interesting to see how many people actually end up having to pay this, because I know in the city of Seattle, when we were looking at the tax on folks to pay for our social housing, we ended up with a lot more money than was projected. So it just goes to show lots of high earners in our region. It's expected to raise somewhere between $3 and $4 billion is the figure that I have heard so far. And the current plan, with all of the amendments back and forth, it seems like we have landed on a plan that would repeal the sales tax on diapers, over-the-counter drugs, and personal hygiene products. It's going to expand a tax credit to working families. So it's going to now give eligible families rebates of about $1,300 a year, and it's going to give that to an additional 460,000 households. That was one thing that Bob Ferguson was fighting really hard for. And initially, earlier in this process, he had said, I'm not going to sign anything that doesn't include more money for working families. So that amendment seems like it has gone through. Under the bill, also, businesses that are grossing under $300,000 a year would no longer pay business and occupation tax. Great news for freelancers. It also directs 5% of revenues to a fund that pays for childcare programs. So and as we were discussing earlier, there are a lot of high earners in our city. One open question has been if millionaires will actually leave. And do we care?
I won't answer that second part. I feel like the millionaires will leave thing, there needs to be some more data to back up that argument, because I feel like that gets thrown around a lot, but we haven't really seen that. Like, there could be a couple anecdotal things that get shared, but until there's more rigorous reporting, I feel like that's one that we would need to approach with a little bit of a grain of salt.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I was just rereading this article that was, I think, about a month old, and it was a story from Las Vegas, where they were, I think it had like exodus of California and Washington State, wealthy residents who were moving to Las Vegas because of the high taxes here. And then many or most of the sources were real estate agents who do have kind of you would say, vested interest in spinning that narrative, I would say. I'm not saying they're lying, but I do think that is probably some anecdotal evidence. So I would say the same thing. Take it with a grain of salt. I think the data that I saw in one of the stories was there's 21,000, more or less 30,000, I think you said, Jane. I think it's short-sighted to think that all those people live here because there's no income tax, right? People live here for so many reasons. There's the mountains, there's the water, there's the climate, there's their families, like, not all those people are going to leave. That is just impossible. And I don't know. I think what if, say, half of those people leave? Even then, it's from the people who are proponents of this tax, then it's still better than for them not having this tax, I would say. So I would just say we'll have to see it play out.
If half of them leave, that means we get what? $1.5 to $2 billion instead, which is
that's
still
my math, but yeah,
to $2 billion that we didn't have before.
That's my back of the napkin. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Speaking of anecdotal evidence, the first millionaire, or I guess, I don't
Right.
know how much Howard Schultz is worth, but Howard Schultz, famously the former CEO of Starbucks and the founder, has announced that he is going to be leaving Seattle. And this is an interesting time also, since news broke this week that Starbucks is closing down 5 stores in Seattle. 4 of them were stores that were in the middle of trying to unionize, and Starbucks says that the closures have nothing to do with that. There's now been a lawsuit filed alleging actually, yes, it does. So we'll see what plays out there. But Howard Schultz posted on LinkedIn, the worst social media site.
It's just so funny that it was on LinkedIn to me. It's just
LinkedIn is now just Facebook for people who have their jobs as their personality, is my take. But we don't need to get into all that. But Schultz says he and his wife are leaving. Their family is moving to Miami. Some of their foundation operations will still be based in Seattle. But it has been funny to see some of Seattleites' reactions to Schultz leaving Seattle. Have you all seen any of that?
I have not yet, but I feel like big news comes in threes. So I anticipate this is the surest sign that the Sonics are actually coming back. Because if people don't remember, Schultz is a major player in why the Sonics went away in many people's perspectives. So,
and why a lot of people are still very mad at him.
Yes. But I was going to say the only other thing, just so I don't forget, because I don't think Schultz leaving has anything actually to do with the Millionaires Tax. But I do think that Schultz and people like him who lived in Washington, or the way Washington likes to put itself forward, like to position themselves as a progressive kind of state. But this part of the tax code, relatively, and Jim Brunner noted this in his story, we have a pretty regressive tax code. You were talking about all the things, Jane, that now will not kind of face taxes, those very basic quality of life and need things. And so I don't know, maybe this is all kind of poetically connected in some way.
100%. Well, Bob Ferguson has said that he does plan to sign this bill once it gets reconciled in the Senate, since there were some amendments made. But soon we might have it be official that Washington has an income tax for the first time in its history. All right, let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll talk about more money issues. We're going to talk about a new proposed levy for library funding. On Tuesday, Mayor Katie Wilson announced the details of the latest proposed levy for the Seattle Public Library. So this proposes levying $410 million between 2027 and 2033. We're going to vote on this in August if it's approved by the city council. According to Zillow, the average home value in Seattle is around $837,000. And so under this proposal, the levy would apply to homeowners and their property tax. And they would pay roughly 19 cents per every $1,000 of assessed value. So if you've got that $837,000 home, you'd be paying around $150. Were you all around the last time we voted on a levy? How familiar are you all with the whole library levy system here?
I feel like I've been voting on levies. We've been voting on levies every election. I'm trying to think. It's yes. Yes, I was around in 2019. Yes. But I feel like they're kind of not secondary to all the other things we vote on, but I think they've become so common that we kind of not take them for granted, but as voters, they're not so top of mind as much.
I was going to say, I have a solution to this, building off of something that was discussed on a previous episode about having mascots for politicians. We need a song for the levy. And I put forth, and I may be dating myself here, does everyone remember Arthur? Having fun isn't hard when you have your library card?
Yeah. Yes.
I think we need a 2026 version that explains the ins and outs of levies. It will be cringe. It might be the most like ridiculous thing you've ever seen, but it might get some people paying attention to levies more.
How do
I'm
we get
just
the
saying.
IP rights to Arthur is really the question here.
We got to send him a letter.
Yeah, that's true. If we write a really nice letter, they'd probably be like, sure, use Arthur in your ad campaign for the levy. Well, good news though, Chase, is that we as a city tend to really like passing these levies. So we might not even need Arthur to get this one passed. So the last levy, like Margo said, was in 2019, and that was for $219 million. So we're now asking for $410 million, which really kind of shows me how much inflation has played a role in the last 7 years. But in that 2019 levy, 76% of voters supported the levy. And that levy now currently makes up about a third of the library's budget. And in 2012, there was a levy passed for $123 million because there were budget cuts after the 2008 recession that was keeping library hours pretty truncated. And also, the Central Library was paid for by a bond vote by the public in 1998 for $196 million, which had a 69% nice approval rate. Sorry, I did nice myself. But I mean, I think if you look back at the history of asking people in Seattle, hey, will you pay some money to support our public libraries? People seem overwhelmingly to say, yes, I would be happy to. So I guess I'm curious if you all have any thoughts on this levy that has been proposed. So part of that $410 million is going to be to basically keep things running as is. So to continue these hours at 27 libraries. So currently libraries are open either 5, 6, or even all 7 days a week. Of course, they need money to get more books and, just generally keep library operations on the table.
I mean, I personally don't see this not passing. We're a UNESCO city of literature. We, as a city, generally tend to pass our levies. We have some of the most bookstores per capita. We're a city of readers in so many ways. It seems to have support. So I think it's basically a shoo-in. There may be some, on the city council, we may see some like changes to how the funding will be allotted. But I think this is probably, I think voters will probably like this very much, especially because it's like very much a very accessible resource for everyone in the city. This is not for a very specific type of audience. This is very broad-based.
I'll take it a step further and say that if this doesn't passes, I think this would be a major shock. I don't think Wilson would be coming forward with this unless they were very confident in it passing. And echoing everything Margo said, this is a city of readers. Thankfully, still, we have a cat bookstore. There's a great piece by listener Paul Constant that I read that I just loved. I'm not saying that we could bring cats to the library, but the only
maybe
interesting...
a little carrier, like a backpack with a little bubble.
That would be very cute. The only thing that I think that kind of is interesting about this is in David Croman's story in the Seattle Times, this doesn't leave a lot of room for other things to kind of address. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing or kind of casting any sort of criticism there. It just is, this is very clearly a big priority for Wilson. And I think that it is a big priority for people in the city, but it does also then open up questions of, well, what will then kind of be the next thing? What will be left over for some of those other things? And she knows this. She's aware of kind of the limits that she's about to be approaching.
Going back to something Margo said earlier about how now this goes to the city council and they will be reviewing this proposal. One thing that stuck out to me as a potential place for discussion is the $7 million within this plan allotted for security officers and security systems. It makes sense, of course, the library's got to have a security system. And currently, because libraries have become kind of a de facto place where people find services and resources and hang out during the day because it's one of our last third places in town, We do kind of need to figure out a way to keep libraries safe for everyone. Recently, there have been some concerns about the library's approach to security. The Urbanist ran a piece about this. I won't get into the full back and forth here, but there were some details left out of the story. The library responded. Also, on Tuesday afternoon, someone died of an overdose at the Capitol Hill branch of the library. I think all of this kind of highlights this difficult position that the library is in here, being a place where a lot of people hang out during the day and really trying to balance the needs of all of the patrons.
One of those things where if it has reached this point, there was obviously a big systemic failure further upstream, and you would want to see people's needs being met and people getting support and help they need so that this isn't kind of falling heavily on the library. Because any sort of institution can only do so much. I don't think that they're capable of always addressing the complicated, very important, but also really, really tough struggles people are having. I love the library, but the library cannot save us. I wish they could, but I don't know if they can fix
They're
all
really
of the
trying
problems.
in a lot of ways.
I know.
This all gets me thinking that I should probably buy this hat that I've been thinking about for a while. It's made by a local maker called Studio Toujours, and it just says library power user on the hat. And I feel like that is a good synopsis of how I feel about this levy. We'll see what happens with it, but it, like Chase said, I would be very surprised if it does not move forward. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Seattle's Fifth Avenue Theater. Seattle's Fifth Avenue Theater recently announced layoffs. Margo, I know you wrote about this for the Seattle Times. For people who aren't familiar, what is Seattle's Fifth Avenue Theater? Like, what kind of shows do they typically host, and what's been going on with them lately?
So the Fifth Avenue Theater is actually now the Fifth Avenue Theater Company. Basically, they are a producing and presenting theater company of mostly musicals. So you can see The Wizard of Oz there, and they'll produce it in-house, meaning they'll have local singers and dancers who are presenting it on stage. So a total, Seattle cast of local talent, or they'll have a musical that is, touring across the country, and they'll host it and they'll, in their theater and put it on for you. They are having, as many theater companies, quite a bit of financial issues, and have been kind of behind the scenes fundraising. They raised $10 million since 2023, but it hasn't been enough to fill a $7.5 million deficit, basically a hole, $7.5 million hole, which is quite significant, and are now launching another kind of $12 million campaign, and have laid off about or are in the process of laying off 14 people right now. So they're one of the only theater companies that are producing with local talent, local musical theater. So that is a big deal for Seattle.
So what are the economics of putting on a show? So you mentioned, these are actors and dancers and talent that is coming locally. I assume all of those folks are, like getting paid a full-time salary for that work.
They work with a union, and they have very standard wages, and it's not always full-time necessarily, but it's very standardized, and that is how a lot of folks, will piece together a living, or at least a wage, right? By auditioning for these shows and then working a certain set of weeks or months. And so that being one of the few places in the region where you can do that kind of work. And if that would be falling away, that would be a major economic driver that falls away for the region. The people at the Fifth told me the main danger that we're in right now is that we won't be producing here anymore. That basically the only thing that you're going to be seeing here is traveling shows that you could see anywhere, that you could see in New York, that you could see, in any other city with a cast that is from New York, and they'll come here, but it won't be with the local cast, and so more people could be out of work.
Chase, have you been to any shows at the Fifth Avenue Theater?
I haven't, but you know what? I am going to, because the thing that kind of jumps out to me in reading this really great reporting that Margo did, and is something that we've talked about, is like, you want to hopefully have this be something that is not like the Grim Reaper feeling like the end. Because there are clearly, what jumped out to me from the story, there are clearly people that still support this theater and other theaters. You had noted that subscriptions are up from previous years, but they're still well below what they were pre-pandemic. And that causes kind of these domino effects of just additional challenges. So I'm planning to go. I would love to see The Wizard of Oz put on by local folks. That sounds remarkable and really fun.
Right. So and it's not just it's not just that subscriptions, ticket sales are up, and then it's the same problem that the library has, that basically anyone has. Costs are up. Everything is so much more expensive that, I keep saying, like, the math is not mathing.
What are the most relevant costs? Like, I imagine that you probably want to pay everyone more just with the cost of living going up. Yes. I imagine there are costs to, I don't know, the costumes or the lighting or, I mean, what are people not thinking of that you encountered in your reporting?
That's a good question. I mean, labor is a major one, and especially the minimum wage has been a burden. And I hear from people like nonprofits that are like, we want to pay people well and we love the minimum wage, but it is also hard for our budget. And then owning or renting a property is really hard. And so what the Fifth has done, actually, that's why they changed their name to the Fifth Avenue Theater Company, is because they actually are not a permanent resident of that building anymore. And they have now a partnership with STG. And basically STG is a permanent resident of that. And the Fifth Avenue is now only using the building when they are producing shows or when they are doing shows, when they are rehearsing and putting on a show, which means that they don't have to pay rent on the building constantly when it's dormant. And SDG is this year going to start doing concerts and other things in that building. And SDG has a much more robust budget, can afford to do that. And the Fifth Avenue can focus its budget on producing those shows. And that is stuff that you see across the cultural sector, where people are like, it is just not worth it to own or rent these buildings constantly, and we're just gonna reduce these costs in that way. So I would say, property, labor, and then those are honestly the main ones. And then it's also, it sounds kind of ridiculous, but it's it's expensive to fundraise. You need to hire people who are very good at talking to wealthy people and being and get money. And that is actually a hard job. And to staff up for that is not as easy as you would think. And I'm hearing more and more that is something that is quite difficult, actually.
I mean, historically, where has the money from arts come from? Is it that there are fewer people who want to support the arts now? Is it that we all just have less money? What is kind of the thing that has changed here, that where the arts didn't feel like they were struggling before, but it really seems like things are kind of rough right now?
The arts were struggling before. Let's keep it really real. So the way that I describe this is before the pandemic, the art sector, it was a house of cards. It was the pandemic was a windstorm, and it was really, really easy to blow it apart because it had no foundation. The Fifth Avenue had a deficit before the pandemic, right? That was normal. It wasn't happening to this extent, but it was normal. They already were stuck in this cycle of constant fundraising and living on the edge, so close to the brink. And what has changed is that people's habits have changed. There's a generational turnover where people are not, a younger generation is not really inclined to buy subscriptions. right? Which subscriptions kind of functions as a sort of endowment, as a sort of savings account where you could, as an organization, plan very far ahead or somewhat far ahead and plan your show. That's not happening anymore.
Wait, so what is a subscription at Fifth Avenue
Yes.
Theater? What does that get you?
It's $180, and you basically buy a season. I think it's all shows for this season, so it's 5 shows for a certain amount of money. And what that does for them is they have all the money in the bank to start from, so that they can upfront, right? And having the upfront money helps them say, oh, we can plan and we can pay this much to our vendors and to our staff, and that is what they really need, is to have the money in the bank ahead of time. And things being so expensive, it's just a problem on both sides, because organizations can't raise their prices because people will not come if you raise your prices more. But then at the same time, people are just like, I need to drive, I need to park, I'm just not going to do it. And so they are just much more careful and much more picky, and they want to be sure that they are going to have a good time for the money that they are spending. And so it just feels too risky to put your eggs in a certain cultural basket. And then if you're a big organization that is paying rent on a big building or owning a big building that is employing a lot of people, those are big costs and you just can't recoup it. So if you're a smaller organization that is much more nimble, you're actually a little bit better off these days, is kind of where I'm sensing things are right now, which is kind of a flip side of where it used to be. It used to be that it was kind of 50-50. A nonprofit, an arts nonprofit, used to rely on kind of ticket sales versus money from foundations, from philanthropists, stuff like that. Now, because ticket sales are much lower and subscriptions are much lower, people are relying much, much more on money from philanthropy and foundations. But that is also much less reliable these days, because the stock market has all been crazy. Corporations are scaling down their funding. So it's all not good. So all that to say, with kind of the income tax, I'm curious how that will impact philanthropy as well. So that'll be an interesting one to watch.
Interesting. Yes. Well, okay. Last question. Margo, you mentioned earlier that part of the strategy here that Fifth Ave is trying to put forward is by not owning their space anymore. STG owns it now. They only rent it when they're using it. What other models might theaters try here? So I know you also wrote a recent piece about how smaller movie theaters are seeing success with showing indie films and special showings. Is there some lesson to be learned there about what consumers want and what a theater company, for instance, might be able to put forward that people would be into?
I have 2 thoughts here. One is that what we're seeing is theaters kind of collaborating and merging, where people are saying it just doesn't make sense for both of our theaters to own our separate buildings. We're going to at least merge part of our operations, and our ticketing operations are just going to do this thing for both of our theaters. The other part is, I think, and this is where the smaller organizations once again have this kind of leg up, which is, if you speak to a certain community or a subculture, I think you really have a leg up, because if you're speaking to a broad audience, I think it's much harder today. And I think if you have a niche and you're not trying to do everything, I think you can actually make it work these days. And I think when you're bigger, that's just not doable. Operating on a smaller scale honestly seems kind of the only way that I'm seeing organizations survive.
Chase, any final thoughts here?
I have positive news to offer some hope.
Good. Chase, we need you. Come on.
Give us one piece of positive news to end on here.
There are still people interested in going to these things, especially when you lean into your specificity.
Yes.
When you lean into that niche. Embrace who you are. Bring those small bands that you can't see anywhere else.
Yes.
The Beacon Cinema, which was noted in Margo's great piece, they're bringing Bleak Week, which, if nobody knows what that is, it's a series of films that are really, really heavy films that kind of, again, as the title suggests, are notorious for just how depressing they are. But it is something that you can't see anywhere else, or sort of that repertory programming. That's obviously where I know a lot of things about that. But I still see signs of hope. It is still difficult, but there are people that are day in, day out figuring out how to make this work. They're having to get creative. They're having to get scrappy, but they're still surviving. So I think folks should support them where they can.
Well, thanks, Chase. That's all for today here at CityCast Seattle. Margo Vansynghel, arts economy reporter for the Seattle Times. Thank you so much for bringing your reporting here.
Thanks so much for having me.
And Chase Hutchinson, critic and journalist. Thanks, as always, for joining us.
Thanks so much.
I'm your host, Jane C. Hu. And listeners, we want to hear from you. If you know how to, I don't know, like save the entire arts industry, send us an email. You can email us at seattle@citycast.fm, or you can text us or leave us a voicemail at 206-880-3931. Until next time, see you, Seattle.